Splatterhouse, one of the goriest game quadrilogies about. Really epic series of games. Splatterhouse tells the story of Rick Taylor and his girlfriend Jennifer, who later becomes his wife. The first Splatterhouse was an arcade game that eventually would be ported to the TurboGrafx 16 in 1987, I believe. Now, in the first game, Rick Taylor is a parapsychology student attending college, and they visit the mansion of a guy named Dr. Henry West, who was apparently a very prominent authority on parapsychology. However, he's not been seen in years. This mansion's a very foreboding place. People go there, they don't return. Rick and Jennifer somewhat unwisely go there on a very dark and stormy night. They go through the doors, and that's what happens in the actual attract sequence if you let the arcade game run. Everything goes dark, you hear Jennifer scream. Rick Taylor wakes up several hours later in what's supposedly the basement or dungeon of the mansion, and when he wakes up, he's wearing the Terror Mask, which is one of the principal characters of the games. The Terror Mask is a Mayan burial mask that is inhabited by a demon. It's demonically possessed, and essentially what happens, the mask says to Rick that it will help him save Jennifer. And essentially what happens, the mask urges Rick to go on this rampage through the mansion and the grounds. And eventually, Rick finds Jennifer, and she mutates into a monster right before his eyes. He has to fight her and eventually kill her, and she dies in his arms. And Rick then finds out that the Splatterhouse, as it's called, is actually a living sentient being. And he jumps down this hole in the floor and kills what's essentially this womb that's created all the monsters in the mansion. And after he kills the womb, the mansion begins to basically burn to the ground. It's on fire. Rick escapes out into the graveyard just outside the mansion, where he fights this monster called Hell Chaos. And it's essentially like this giant head that emanates up through the floor and tries to swat Rick with his hands. Now, after you kill Hell Chaos, this ghostly face appears and dissipates in like this bright flash of light. Now, it's kind of implied that this is the spirit of Henry West being put to rest, but Namco have never confirmed this. And in the ending sequence for the arcade game, the mask shatters from Rick's face, and it's very kind of forlorn, mournful music plays in the background as he walks away, Jennifer presumably dead. That brings us on to Splatterhouse part 2 as it's called in Japan, or just Splatterhouse 2. Several months later, Rick Taylor is tormented by guilt and misery when the mask reforms and psychically tells him that Jennifer isn't dead and that it can help him save her. And essentially what happens is Rick finds out there's a second Splatterhouse, a second mansion. And him and the Terror Mask team up yet again. And essentially what happens is, in the second mansion, Rick finds a doorway to the land of the dead, where he rescues Jennifer's soul and brings it back to our world, and escapes by speedboat, and he fights the end of game bosses like this kind of Legion-esque monster. And the ending sequence is Rick and Jennifer embracing on a cliff top as the second Splatterhouse basically kind of sinks beneath a lake. Rick comments that as long as the Terror Mask is out there, it can happen again, which it does in Splatterhouse 3. Splatterhouse 3 is set 5 years after Splatterhouse 2. Rick and Jennifer are now married, and they have a young son called David. And he's really successful. He's a stockbroker. He's got this big mansion in Connecticut. What happens is, monsters invade his mansion. And over the course of a night, he finds out that his son David has latent psychic abilities, which this monster called the Evil One is basically trying to attempt to open a porthole to free itself into our world and basically cover it in darkness. And yet again, the Mask and Rick team up. Now, Splatterhouse 3 was a massive, fundamental leap on from Splatterhouse 2. It played more like a Final Fight-esque beat-em-up in 3 dimensions rather than a 2D beat-em-up. It had multiple endings where Jennifer could die, David could die, Jennifer became a mindless beast. And it's definitely the strongest game out of the series. Now, the Splatterhouse 3 was 1994, and the series lay dormant until 2010's Splatterhouse, which was a reboot of the series. And it's pretty much a retelling of the first game, the West Mansion, Rick and Jennifer. Splatterhouse had quite a stellar voice cast. Josh Keaton, Jim Cummings doing the voice of the Mask. However, for me, Splatterhouse, the 2010 game, was kind of bland, to be honest. It was kind of a faceless brawler. It didn't seem to have the personality or depth that the first 3 games had. Now, as for playing the games, emulation really is the only way you're going to play the arcade game. As for the Mega Drive games, which were Splatterhouse 2 or 3, or Genesis over in the States, eBay is probably your best bet. Now, they are excellent games. They are definitely well worth tracking down and playing if you have the opportunity. Splatterhouse 3, I've noticed the Japanese version is a lot easier. And the spin kick, which is one of the principal moves in Splatterhouse 3, in the States, the American version, it basically is quite powerful. It lasts for about 5 seconds. Rick spins round and round doing a roundhouse kick. It'll floor anything. In the Japanese version, it's like a quick spin round. It floors enemies but does very little damage. However, the Japanese version is a lot easier. The time limits on each stage are a lot more lenient. And you have a lot more lives. And, well, extra lives are a lot more prominent in Splatterhouse 3D Japanese version. Splatterhouse 2, the terror mask looks different, and that's about it. So that's Splatterhouse, really. Excellent trilogy of games, well worth checking out. And until next time, this is David signing out. Take care.